I never thought my life would take such a drastic turn in a matter of minutes. I, Sarah, a 28-year-old woman, had always considered myself a stable, loyal, and committed person. My relationship with Ethan had been going on for 5 years, and although we had our ups and downs like any couple, I felt we had built something solid and lasting. But fate, or perhaps my own actions, were about to put all that to the test. It was a Friday afternoon when Ethan called to let me know he would have to stay late at the office. An important meeting with foreign investors required his presence, and although we had planned a romantic dinner that night, I understood that his career was important. With a sigh of resignation, I told him not to worry and that we would find another time to be together. As I hung up the phone, I stood looking out the window of our apartment. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For a moment, I felt a pang of loneliness. Ethan and I had been so busy lately that we barely had time for ourselves, let alone for each other. I decided to take advantage of that night for myself. I poured myself a glass of red wine, put on some soft music, and immersed myself in the bathtub with aromatic salts. The hot water relaxed my tense muscles, and little by little, I felt the stress of the week dissolving away. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander. I don't know how long I spent there, but when I came out of the bathroom wrapped in my favourite silk robe, I felt rejuvenated and, I must admit, a little excited. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe the sensuality of the moment, but I felt a growing desire within me. It had been a while since Ethan and I had shared an intimate moment, and my body seemed to be craving attention. Looked at myself in the full-length mirror in our bedroom, I let the robe fall and observed my reflection. Despite the years, I felt attractive and desired. I ran my hands over my body, gently caressing my skin. The touch of my fingers ignited the fire that was beginning to burn inside me. Without thinking too much, I lay down on the bed. The soft cotton sheet caressed my naked skin, causing a shiver of pleasure. I closed my eyes and began to explore my body with my hands, imagining they were Ethan's. My fingers traced circles on my belly, slowly moving up towards my breasts, playing with my nipples already hardened by excitement. A moan escaped my lips as my hand descended to the most sensitive part of my body. The room filled with the sound of my ragged breathing and the soft gasps I couldn't contain. I immersed myself in a whirlwind of sensations, completely forgetting the outside world. I was so absorbed in my own pleasure that I didn't hear the sound of the front door opening. I didn't notice the footsteps approaching down the hall. It wasn't until the bedroom door burst open that I realized I was no longer alone. There, standing in the doorway with eyes wide open, was Jake, Ethan's younger brother. For an instant that seemed eternal, we stared at each other, both paralyzed by surprise and disbelief. Me, naked and vulnerable on the bed, with my hands still on my body. Him, with a mixture of shock and something else I couldn't decipher in his gaze. "Jake!" I shouted, coming out of my stupor and struggling to cover myself with the sheet. What are you doing here?" Jake seemed to recover as well, quickly turning and giving me his back. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Ethan asked me to pick up some documents. I have an emergency key. I didn't know you'd be God. I'm so sorry. My heart was beating so fast I feared he might hear it. Shame and panic took over me. What would Jake think of me now? Would he tell Ethan what he had seen? My mind was a whirlwind of questions and fears. "Please leave the room," I managed to say with a trembling voice. I'll get dressed and we'll talk." Jake nodded without turning around and quickly left, closing the door behind him. I sat there on the bed, trying to process what had just happened. Tears began to well up in my eyes, a mixture of shame, fear, and frustration. I got dressed with shaky hands, opting for sweatpants and a loose t-shirt. I needed to feel as covered as possible. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm myself before facing Jake. When I came out of the bedroom, I found him sitting on the living room couch, his head in his hands. Upon hearing My steps, he looked up. His eyes, so similar to Ethan's, were filled with confusion and something that seemed like guilt. "Sarah, he began, but I interrupted him. "No, please let me speak first," I said, sitting in the armchair across from him. "What you saw, it's not what it seems. I was just having a private moment. Ethan and I have been so busy lately, and God, this is so embarrassing." Jake looked at me with a mixture of understanding and discomfort. "You don't have to explain anything to me, Sarah. It was my fault for coming in without warning. I should have called or sent a message first." We sat in silence for a moment. The tension in the air was palpable. Finally, I gathered the courage to ask the question that terrified me. "Jake, please, I beg you, don't tell Ethan anything about this. It would destroy him, and it's not what you think. I love your brother." "Really?" Jake looked at me intently, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes that I couldn't decipher. Doubt, compassion, or something else. "I won't say anything, Sarah, I promise. This will stay between us," he finally said. I felt momentary relief, but I knew things wouldn't be that simple. The dynamic between us had changed irrevocably. Jake stood up, visibly uncomfortable. "I think it's better if I leave. The documents can wait," he muttered. I nodded, unable to look him in the eye. I walked him to the door in silence. Just before leaving, he turned to me. "Sarah, he began, but seemed to think better of it. "Take care, okay?" And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of what had just happened. I closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. The tears I had been holding back finally broke free. How had I gotten into this situation? How could I look Jake in the eye again? And most importantly, how would this affect my relationship with Ethan? My story is not over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you. We return to the story. The following days were torture. Every time my phone rang, my heart skipped a beat, fearing it was Ethan telling me Jake had told him everything. But days passed and nothing happened. Ethan remained the same as always, loving but busy. However I had changed, I felt constantly anxious, guilty. Every time Ethan kissed me or hugged me, I couldn't help but think about that afternoon and Jake's gaze. What would he think of me now? Would he judge me? Or maybe... No, I couldn't allow myself to think about that Jake was my boyfriend's brother. Nothing more. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself of that, I couldn't get the image of his eyes out of my mind. The way he had looked at me just before leaving, a week after the incident. Ethan invited me to a family dinner. My stomach churned at the idea of seeing Jake again, but I knew I couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. The dinner was a test of nerves. Jake was there, of course, and although he acted normally, I could feel his gaze on me when he thought no one was noticing. Every time our eyes met, I felt an electric current run through my body. After dinner, while helping Ethan's mother in the kitchen, Jake came in to drop off some plates. We were left alone for a moment, and the air seemed to charge with tension. "Sarah," he murmured, coming a little closer than necessary. "Can we talk for a moment, in private?" I felt my heart racing. What would he want to tell me? Was he going to blackmail me? Or maybe... No, I couldn't. Allow myself to think of other possibilities. "Sure," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "After dinner?" Jake nodded and left the kitchen, leaving me with a mixture of fear and, I must admit, a hint of excitement that I was ashamed to feel. The rest of the evening passed as if in a haze. I could barely concentrate on the conversations, my mind constantly wandering to the impending talk with Jake. When it was finally time to say goodbye, Jake gave me a discreet signal to follow him to the backyard. Once alone, under the dim moonlight, Jake turned to me. His face was serious, but there was something else in his eyes, an intensity that made me hold my breath. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he began. "I know I promised not to say anything, and I'll keep that promise, but..." He took a step closer, and I could feel the heat emanating from his body. My heart was beating so hard I feared he might hear it. "I can't stop thinking about you," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. About what I saw, how you looked. I know it's wrong, that you're my brother's girlfriend, but... His words hung in the air between us. I knew I should step away, tell him this was wrong, that I loved Ethan. But my body seemed to have a will of its own. I found myself taking a step towards him, further, shortening the distance between us. Jake, I began, but the words got stuck in my throat. And then, in a moment of madness or perhaps clarity, Jake closed the distance between us and kissed me. It was a passionate kiss, full of contained desire and longing. For an instant, I lost myself in the sensation, responding to the kiss with equal fervour. But as quickly as it began, it ended. I pulled away abruptly, panting and with my heart racing. The reality of what had just happened hit me like a bucket of cold water. No, this is wrong, I said, backing away. I love Ethan. This can't happen again. Jake looked at me with a mixture of desire and regret. I know, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. But Sarah, I can't deny what I feel. I have to go, I muttered, turning around and practically running back to the house. I found Ethan in the living room, chatting animatedly with his parents. When he saw me, he smiled, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. Honey, are you okay? You look pale, he said, approaching with concern. Yes, I think I ate something that didn't agree with me. I lied. Can we leave now? Ethan nodded, said goodbye to his parents, and took me to the car. During the entire drive home, I remained silent, looking out the window and trying to process what had just happened. How had I gotten to this point? How could I look Ethan in the eye, knowing I had just kissed his brother? And worst of all, how could I deny that a part of me had enjoyed that kiss? That night, as I lay in bed next to Ethan, who was sleeping peacefully, I realized I was at a crossroads. I had to make a decision, and soon confess everything and risk losing Ethan. Try to forget what happened and move on as if nothing had happened, or explore these new and dangerous feelings towards Jake. Whatever I decided would change my life forever, and as dawn approached, I still didn't have a clear answer. The following days were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. On one hand, I felt guilty every time Ethan hugged or kissed me. His displays of affection, which used to fill me with joy, now caused a pang of remorse. On the other hand, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake and that stolen kiss under the eye. Moonlight. The intensity of that moment haunted me, appearing in my dreams and distracting me during the day. I tried to immerse myself in work, hoping that routine and responsibilities would drive away these intrusive thoughts. But it was useless. Every time my phone rang, a part of me hoped it would be Jake, even though I knew I shouldn't desire that. A week after the incident at the family dinner, I received a text message that made my heart skip a beat. We need to talk. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on the corner of your office tomorrow at 2, Jake? I stared at the screen, debating between reason and desire. I knew the right thing would be to ignore the message, delete it, and move on with my life. But my fingers seemed to have a will of their own as they typed a response. Okay, I'll be there. The next day passed in a haze of anxiety and anticipation. When the time for the meeting came, I found myself in front of the coffee shop, my heart beating so hard I feared everyone around me could hear it. Jake was already there, sitting at a table in the back. Our eyes met, and I felt that spark of electricity that I had been trying to ignore. I sat across from him, aware of every inch that separated us. Thank you for coming, Jake said, his voice low and charged with emotion. I know this is complicated, but I couldn't leave things like this. I nodded, unable to find the right words. Jake continued. What happened? I can't stop thinking about it, Sarah. I know it's wrong. I know you're my brother's girlfriend, but there's something between us that I can't ignore. His words resonated within me, reflecting my own conflicting thoughts, but I knew I had to be strong for everyone's sake. Jake, I began, my voice barely a whisper. What happened was a mistake. I love Ethan. He trusts us, you as his brother and me as his partner. We can't betray that trust." Jake stretched his hand across the table, gently brushing my fingers. The simple contact sent shivers down my spine. "What if it wasn't a mistake?" he asked, his eyes fixed on mine. "What if this is something real, something worth exploring?" For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like Jake and I together, without secrets, without guilt. But the image of Ethan, his confident smile and unconditional love, intervened in that fantasy. "We can't," I finally said, withdrawing my hand. "I'm sorry, Jake, but I can't do this to Ethan, and you shouldn't either." I saw the pain reflected in his eyes, but also a glimmer of understanding. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "But Sarah, if you ever change your mind—" "I won't," I interrupted him. Although a part of me wasn't so sure, I stood up, ready to leave, when Jake spoke again. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice laden with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "Ethan, he's not as perfect as you think." I stopped in my tracks, turning to him. "What do you mean?" Jake took a deep breath before continuing. "Last week, when he said he had a business meeting, I saw him at a bar with another woman. They were very close, too close to be just colleagues. I felt as if the ground was opening beneath my feet. Ethan, my Ethan cheating on me. It couldn't be true." "You're lying," I said, although doubt had already been planted in my mind. "Why would I?" Jake replied, his gaze intense and sincere. "I know he's my brother, but I also know what I saw, and I thought you deserved to know." I left the coffee shop stunned, my mind spinning. Could it be possible that Ethan was cheating on me? Or was this a ploy by Jake to separate me from his brother? The trust that had been the pillar of my relationship with Ethan began to crumble. The following days were a hell of doubts and suspicions. Every call Ethan received, every text message, every late business meeting became a source of anxiety for me. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to trust. But Jake's words echoed in my mind one night. While Ethan was in the shower, I couldn't resist the temptation. I took his phone and, with my heart in my throat, I started to check it. At first, I found nothing out of the ordinary. Work messages, conversations with friends, nothing that raised suspicions. I was about to put it down when I saw a name I didn't recognize, Lauren. With trembling fingers, I opened the conversation. What I read left me breathless. Affectionate messages, plans for secret, meetings, even some photos that made me feel nauseous. It was true, Ethan was cheating on me. I dropped the phone as if it burned. Tears began to well up in my eyes as the reality of the situation hit me. How could he have done this to me? How long had he been cheating on me? When Ethan came out of the bathroom, he found me sitting on the bed, with his phone in front of me and tears running down my cheeks. "Sarah, what?" he began, but stopped, short when he saw the expression on my face. "Who is Lauren?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I saw the colour drain from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He didn't need to say anything. His silence said it all. "How long?" I asked, anger gradually replacing the pain. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, it was a mistake. It didn't mean anything," Ethan stammered, approaching me. I jumped up, moving away from him. "Don't touch me." "How long, Ethan?" He lowered his gaze, defeated. 3 months, he muttered. 3 months. 90 days of lies, of betrayal. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "I want you to leave," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "Now. Sarah, please, we can fix this. I love you. It was a stupid mistake," Ethan pleaded. But I had already made my decision. "Leave, Ethan. It's over." I watched him gather some of his things in silence, casting me pleading looks that I ignored. When he finally closed the door behind him, I collapsed on the floor, letting the cry I had been holding back flow freely. I don't know how long I spent like that, crying on the floor of our bedroom. No, my bedroom now. When I finally managed to calm down, I realized there was a decision I needed to make. With trembling hands, I took my phone and dialed a number I knew I shouldn't be dialing. Sarah, Jake's voice sounded surprised on the other end of the line. You were right, I said, my voice hoarse from crying, about Ethan. You were right. There was a moment of silence before Jake spoke again. I'm so sorry, Sarah. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I closed my eyes, aware that what I was about to say would change everything. You, I whispered. I need you. The silence on the other end of the line seemed eternal. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice laden with emotion. I'm on my way. I hung up the phone and stared at the screen, wondering if I had just made another mistake. But at that moment, with a broken heart and shattered trust, I didn't care. I needed to feel loved, desired, even if only for one night. Jake arrived in record time. When I opened the door, our gazes met and all the tension accumulated over weeks exploded. Without a word, we melted into a passionate kiss, urgent, almost desperate. His hands roamed my body eagerly, as if he wanted to memorize every curve, every corner. I clung to him, seeking in his warmth and escape from the pain that consumed me. We shed our clothes as we awkwardly made our way to the bedroom, leaving a trail of garments in our wake. We fell onto the bed, our bodies intertwining in a frenzied dance of passion and desire. Jake kissed every inch of my skin, whispering words of adoration that made my heart race even more. I gave myself completely to the sensation, allowing pleasure to temporarily drown out the pain of Ethan's betrayal. We made love with an intensity I had never experienced before. It was raw, passionate, almost animal. Each thrust, each caress, each moan seemed to purge a little more of the pain I carried inside. I lost myself in the sensation, in the heat of his body, in the strength of his arms. When we finally reached climax together, it was as if a wave of relief washed over me. For a moment, all the pain, all the confusion, all the guilt disappeared, replaced by a feeling of fullness that left me breathless. We lay embraced in silence, our bodies intertwined and covered with a thin layer of sweat. Jake traced soft circles on my back, while I listened to the beating of his heart, still accelerated. Sarah, he finally murmured, breaking the silence. I know this is complicated, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. It's not just desire or physical attraction. I think I've fallen in love with you. His words left me breathless. A part of me wanted to reciprocate, to tell him that I too felt something deep for him. But another part, the rational part that had been silenced for the past few hours, began to sound the alarms. I sat up. Looking into his eyes, Jake, I don't know what to say. All of this has happened so fast. I just found out Ethan was cheating on me. And now, I need time to think, to process everything. I saw a flash of pain in his eyes, but he nodded understandingly. I understand. I don't want to pressure you. Take all the time you need. He got up from the bed and began to dress slowly. I watched him in silence, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. When he was fully dressed, he came over and gave me a soft kiss on the forehead. I'll be here when you're ready, he said. Before leaving the room, I heard the front door close, and I was left alone with my thoughts. What had I just done? Had I ruined the last chance of reconciliation with Ethan? Or had I found something real and beautiful with Jake? The following days were a constant internal debate. Ethan called me, incessantly, leaving voicemails full of apologies and promises of change. Jake, for his part, respected my space, sending only occasional messages of support. A week after that night with Jake, I received an unexpected call. It was Ethan's mother. Sarah, honey, her voice sounded worried. What's going on? Ethan is devastated. He says he made a terrible mistake. Don't you think you should talk? I felt a pang of guilt. How could I explain to her that not only had I discovered her son's infidelity, but I had also slept with her other son? It's complicated, I replied evasively. Ethan did something I can't easily forgive. Oh dear, she sighed. I know it must be difficult, but true love can overcome any obstacle. Why don't you come to dinner this weekend? The whole family will be here. Maybe being together can help you remember what you have. My stomach churned at the idea. of being in the same room as Ethan and Jake. But I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the situation forever. Okay, I finally agreed. I'll be there. The day of the dinner arrived too soon. I stood in front of the mirror, nervously adjusting my dress. How was I going to handle this? How could I look Ethan in the eye after what I had done with Jake? When I arrived at the family house, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Ethan greeted me at the door, his eyes full of hope and remorse. Jake was in the back of the living room, his intense gaze fixed on me. Dinner was an exercise in self-control. Every time Ethan tried to take my hand under the table, I subtly withdrew it. Every time Jake looked at me, I felt a spark of electricity that I struggled to ignore. Ethan's parents did their best to maintain a light conversation, oblivious to the drama that was silently unfolding before their eyes. After dinner, while helping clean up in the kitchen, Ethan cornered me in a corner. "Sarah, please," he whispered, his eyes pleading. "Give me another chance, I love you. What happened with Lauren was a stupid mistake. It will never happen again." I felt a lump in my throat. A part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to go back to the happy days we had shared, but the image of the messages on his phone and the memory of the night with Jake prevented me from giving in. "I can't, Ethan," I replied, my voice barely audible. "The trust is broken. I can't trust you again." I saw hope fade from his eyes, replaced by a mixture of pain and resignation. He nodded slowly and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Minutes later, Jake entered the kitchen. Our gazes met, and I felt that familiar electric current run through my body. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice, coming closer. I nodded, unable to form words. Jake took another step towards me, reducing the distance between us to just a few inches. "Sarah," he murmured, his warm breath on my cheek. "I know it's complicated, but I can't stop thinking about you, about us." I closed my eyes, fighting against the desire to throw myself into his arms, but I knew I couldn't. Not here. Not now. "Jake, please," I pleaded. "I can't do this. Not here." Just at that moment, we heard a choked gasp. We turned to see Ethan standing in the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "What the hell is going on here?" he roared, his voice trembling with anger. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake and I looked at each other, panic reflected in our eyes. How to explain the inexplicable? "Ethan, it's not what you think," Jake began, but his brother interrupted him. "It's not what I think?" Ethan shouted. "I saw you, the way you look at each other, how close you were. How long has this been going on?" I felt the world crumbling around me. Everything I had feared was happening at this very moment. "Ethan, please, calm down." I tried to reason. "We can talk about this." "Talk," he scoffed. "Talk about how my girlfriend and my brother have been cheating on me, about how the two people I trusted most have betrayed me." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. Just a few weeks ago, I was the betrayed one, and now, "You have no right to talk about betrayal," I snapped, anger finally boiling inside me. "Or did you forget about Lauren?" I saw the colour drain from Ethan's face. Jake looked at us confused, not fully understanding what was going on. That was different," Ethan stammered. "Different how?" I asked, my voice loaded with sarcasm. "Because it was you who was cheating?" The silence that followed was deafening. The three of us looked at each other, caught in a triangle of betrayal, desire, and regret. Finally, it was Jake who broke the silence. "I think we all need to calm down and talk about this like adults," he said. His voice surprisingly calm given the situation. Ethan looked at him with a mixture of anger and pain. "Talk? After you slept with my girlfriend?" "Ex-girlfriend," I corrected automatically, surprising even myself with the firmness of my voice. Both brothers looked at me, surprised by my statement. I took a deep breath before continuing. "Look, this is a mess. We've all made mistakes, Ethan. You cheated on me. Jake and I got close after I discovered your infidelity. No one is innocent here." My words seemed to fall like a bucket. Of cold water on the brothers, Ethan collapsed into a chair, his face a mask of defeat. Jake leaned against the counter, his gaze alternating between his brother and me. "What do we do now?" Jake asked in a low voice. It was a good question. What did we do now? How could we get out of this emotional tangle we had gotten ourselves into? "I think we need time," I finally said. "Time to think, to heal. We all need space to process what has happened." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You're right," he muttered. I'm sorry for everything." Jake took a step towards me, but I stopped him with a look. "That goes for you too, Jake. I need time alone." I saw the pain in his eyes, but he nodded, respecting my decision. I left the kitchen, leaving the brothers alone to talk. As I headed to the front door, Ethan's mother intercepted me. "Sarah, honey, are you leaving so soon?" she asked, her face full of concern. I forced a smile. "Yes, I'm not feeling well. Thank you for dinner." As I drove back home, the tears I had been holding back finally flowed freely. How had we gotten to this point? How could there be so much pain and betrayal between people who supposedly loved each other? My story is not over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you. We return to the story. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. I immersed myself in work, trying to keep my mind occupied and away from recent events. Ethan and Jake respected my wish for space, although occasionally I received messages from both asking how I was doing. One afternoon, while checking my email, I found an email from a software development company in San Francisco. Months ago, I had applied for a position there, more as a distant dream than a real possibility. To my surprise, they offered me the job. I looked out the window of my apartment, observing the city that had been my home for so long. The city where I had loved, where I had been betrayed, where I had betrayed. Was this the opportunity for a new beginning that I so desperately needed? After days of reflection, I made a decision. I accepted the job in San Francisco. It was the change I needed, the opportunity to rediscover myself away from all the drama and pain. The day before my departure, I received 2 unexpected visits. The first was Ethan. "So you're leaving," he said, standing awkwardly at the door of my apartment. I nodded. "I need a new beginning, Ethan, away from all this." I saw the pain in his eyes, but also a glimmer of understanding. "I understand," he said softly. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything, I hope you find the happiness you deserve." His words moved me more than I expected. Despite everything that had happened, a part of me would always love Ethan. I gave him a farewell hug, a bittersweet gesture that marked the definitive end of our story. Hours later, it was Jake who appeared at my door. "Is it true?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. "Are you leaving tomorrow?" "Yes," I replied. "It's best for everyone." Jake took a step towards me, his hand gently brushing my cheek. "And us?" he whispered. "What about what we feel?" I closed my eyes, fighting against the desire to yield to his caresses. "Jake, what happened between us? It was intense and beautiful, but it was born out of wrong circumstances. We both need to heal, to find ourselves before we can be with someone else." I saw disappointment on his face, but also acceptance. "I understand," he finally said, "but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. If someday you decide to come back." He left the phrase hanging in the air, loaded with promises and possibilities. I gave him one last kiss, soft and bittersweet, before saying goodbye. The next day, as the plane took off for San Francisco, I looked out the window at the city I was leaving behind. A city full of memories, both sweet and bitter. I thought of Ethan, of Jake, of everything that had happened. Had I made the right decision? As the clouds parted, revealing a bright blue sky, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in months. I didn't know what the future held for me in San Francisco, but I was ready to find out, ready to start anew, to heal, to grow. Maybe someday I would return. Maybe I would reunite with Ethan or Jake and things would be different. Or maybe I would find a new love, one built on more solid foundations. But for now, my future was open, full of possibilities. I closed my eyes and smiled. My story of love, betrayal, and redemption wasn't over. In fact, I felt it was, just beginning.